The moment I set foot in Vietnam, the air felt thick with more than just humidity. There was a palpable sense of something lurking, unseen, beneath the dense canopy of the jungle. I was just a kid from a small town in the Midwest, far from home and everything familiar. The military training had prepared me for combat, but nothing could prepare me for the eerie feeling of this place. Our arrival was marked not by fanfare or ceremony, but by a silent march into the heart of a land that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The trees whispered secrets in a language I couldn't understand, and the shadows seemed to dance just out of the corner of my eye. I told myself it was just the jitters, a natural reaction to being so far from home in a land so fraught with conflict. At night, as we camped in the relative safety of our makeshift base, the sounds of the jungle came alive. Insects chirped their relentless symphonies, and distant animal calls pierced the darkness. But there were other sounds too, unexplainable, unsettling. Footsteps where there should be none, rustling in the underbrush, too deliberate to be just wildlife. We all felt it, a creeping dread that clung to us like the ever-present sweat on our brows. The veterans spoke in hushed tones about the Viet Cong, an enemy like no other, masters of guerrilla warfare who could be hiding anywhere and everywhere, unseen in the dense foliage. But their words hinted at something more, a fear that went beyond respect for a formidable enemy. They talked of soldiers going missing, patrols finding nothing but abandoned weapons in their wake, and whispers of a labyrinthine nightmare hidden beneath the very ground we walked on. I tried to brush off these stories as just that, stories. But as I lay in my tent each night, listening to the symphony of the unknown, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone, that the jungle itself was watching us, waiting, and deep down, I knew that whatever was out there, hidden in the shadows and whispers, was something far more terrifying than any enemy soldier. This was the beginning of my journey into the heart of darkness, a journey that would lead me down into the depths of fear and madness, a journey into the unknown. Our first few weeks in the jungle felt like an endless march through a world that didn't quite belong to us. We trudged through thick mud, swatted incessantly at mosquitoes, and kept our eyes peeled for an enemy we couldn't see. The heat was oppressive, a constant companion that wore you down, bead by bead of sweat. The whispers in the camp grew louder with each passing day. Stories of the Viet Cong's cunning tactics, their mastery of this unforgiving terrain, and the booby traps they left in their wake. But it was the tales of the tunnels that unnerved me the most. Entire networks burrowed beneath the earth, from which the enemy could strike at any moment, and then vanish without a trace. One stifling afternoon, our squad received orders to scout a nearby area rumored to be a Viet Cong stronghold. As we moved out, the dense foliage seemed to close in around us, creating a green, humid world where the sun barely pierced through. Every step was cautious, every sense heightened. The usual banter that kept our spirits up was gone, replaced by a tense silence. We stumbled upon the first sign unexpectedly. It was a small, almost imperceptible depression in the ground, covered by leaves and twigs. Our point man, Jackson, a guy from Texas with sharp eyes, froze. "Hold up," he hissed, signaling us to stop. It was a trap, a pit hidden beneath foliage, likely filled with spikes. We skirted around it, our hearts pounding, painfully aware of how close we had come to disaster. As we moved deeper into the jungle, the signs of the Viet Cong's presence grew. A discarded sandal, a piece of cloth, and then something more chilling, a makeshift campsite with signs of recent occupation, but no one in sight. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Suddenly, gunfire erupted. It was close, deafening in the confined space of the jungle. We dropped to the ground, scanning for the source, but there was nothing. No movement, no enemy in sight. It felt like the jungle itself had come alive, attacking us from all sides. The realization hit me then. This was their territory, their domain. We were intruders here. The gunfire ceased as abruptly as it had begun. We lay there panting, hearts racing, until our squad leader gave the signal to move out. We left the area, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, lingered. That night, back at our base, I lay awake, the day's events replaying in my mind. The hidden trap, the ghostly campsite, the unseen enemy. The jungle around us seemed to whisper secrets in the darkness, a reminder that this war was unlike any other. In this place, fear had a way of seeping into your bones, of making you doubt what was real and what was imagined. As sleep finally claimed me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were facing something far more sinister than just an enemy army. In the heart of this jungle, there were horrors yet to be uncovered, lurking in the shadows and hidden beneath the earth. And it was down there, in the darkness, that our real test would begin. The days that followed were a blur of patrols, restless nights, and the ever-present sense of unease. We began to find more signs of the Viet Cong's presence, more traps, more evidence of an enemy always just a step ahead of us. But nothing prepared us for the discovery that would change everything. It was during a routine sweep through a particularly dense part of the jungle. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and rotting vegetation. We moved in a tight formation, our senses on high alert. That's when Rodriguez, a young guy from New Mexico who always had a knack for noticing things others missed, stopped dead in his tracks. "Look at this," he whispered, gesturing towards the ground. Hidden beneath a layer of leaves and dirt was a small opening, no larger than a manhole. A chill ran down my spine as we realized what it was, a tunnel entrance. Our squad leader, Sergeant Davis, a seasoned soldier with years of experience, approached it cautiously. He peered into the abyss below, then looked back at us. "We need to check this out," he said, his voice steady, but I could see the concern in his eyes. The decision was made to send a couple of us down into the tunnel. I volunteered, along with Jackson. Armed with just our pistols and flashlights, we descended into the unknown. The tunnel was cramped and suffocating. The air was stale and thick, making it hard to breathe. We had to crawl on our hands and knees, the beam of our flashlights cutting through the pitch-black darkness. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement a potential threat. As we moved deeper, the tunnel branched off in different directions. It was a labyrinth, a network of passages and chambers carved out of the earth. The walls were reinforced with wooden beams and bamboo, evidence of the meticulous work that had gone into creating this subterranean world. We came across a chamber, barely large enough to stand in. It was empty, but the remains of a small fire pit and some discarded supplies suggested it had been used recently. The realization hit me then. We were not just fighting an enemy. We were fighting a shadow that could appear and disappear at will. The further we ventured, the more disoriented we became. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning, a maze with no end. We marked our path, but the fear of getting lost, of being trapped down there with no way out, was always at the back of our minds. It was during one of these explorations that we encountered the true horror of the tunnels. Turning a corner, our flashlights revealed a sight that would haunt me forever. Bodies, several Viet Cong soldiers, long dead, their decomposed forms merging with the earth. The smell was overwhelming, a stench of death and decay that clung to our clothes and skin. We retreated back to the surface, gasping for fresh air. The world above seemed different now, tainted by the knowledge of what lay beneath. The jungle, once just a dense mass of trees and undergrowth, now felt like a facade, a cover for the true battlefield that lay in the dark, suffocating tunnels below. That night, as I lay in my tent, the horrors of the tunnels replayed in my mind. The shadows seemed to move, and every sound was a reminder of the unseen enemy lurking just beneath our feet. Sleep was elusive, and when it finally came, it was filled with nightmares of being lost in an endless dark maze, hunted by ghosts of a war that was as much beneath the ground as it was above it. In the weeks that followed, the tunnels became our grim reality. Each day we delved into the earth, a descent into a world as alien as it was terrifying. We sought to map this underground maze, to disrupt the enemy's movements. But with each foray, I felt as if we were the ones being slowly consumed by the labyrinth. Our squad developed a routine for tunnel raids, but the fear never waned. Descending into the tunnels meant entering a realm where the rules of the surface didn't apply. Here, the Viet Cong were masters, and we were the intruders, stumbling in the dark. The oppressive darkness of the tunnels was a constant enemy. Our flashlights, though powerful, seemed feeble against the encompassing black. Every shadow could hide a trap or an ambush. We learned to move slowly, feeling ahead with our hands before taking a step. The walls, cold and damp, whispered with the echoes of our own movements, as if the tunnels themselves were alive. It was during one such mission that we experienced the true horror of what these tunnels held. We found a room, larger than most, filled with the remnants of what appeared to be a field hospital. Rusting surgical tools, stained bandages, and the acrid smell of antiseptic mixed with blood. But it was the makeshift morgue that stopped us dead in our tracks. Bodies lay in rows, some covered with rags, others left exposed to the air. Their faces, frozen in expressions of pain and terror, seemed to stare back at us from beyond the grave. We didn't linger long, the oppressive atmosphere of death too much even for battle-hardened soldiers. As we crawled back to the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes of those dead soldiers followed us, their silent screams a reminder of the war's brutality. Back on the surface, the tension among the squad was palpable. We joked less, slept fitfully, and the brief moments of respite felt like a distant memory. The jungle around us, once a vibrant ecosystem, now felt like a prison, confining us with its endless expanse of green. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that wore us down. It was the psychological strain of never knowing where the enemy was, of fighting a war against shadows. The tunnels had a way of getting inside your head, of making you see and hear things that weren't there. One night, as I lay awake in my tent, the sounds of the jungle around me, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible above the chorus of insects. At first, I thought it was the wind, or perhaps a trick of my imagination. But then, it came again, a whisper in the darkness, calling my name. I sat up, heart racing, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the endless, suffocating dark. The following days were marked by a growing sense of paranoia. Every rustle in the underbrush, every creak of a tree, seemed like a signal of an impending attack. We were fighting an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, their whispers haunting us both in the tunnels below and in the world above. The tunnels had become more than just a strategic challenge. They were a psychological battleground where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. We were not just fighting the Viet Cong, we were fighting the ghosts of a war that seemed to have no end, echoes of the damned that refused to be silenced. The longer we spent in Vietnam, the more the lines between reality and the surreal seemed to blur. Our incursions into the tunnels grew more frequent and more harrowing. Each venture into the depths felt like a journey into the heart of madness itself. During one particular mission, we were tasked with clearing a section of tunnels rumored to be a major Viet Cong hideout. The air was thick with tension as we prepared to descend. I remember looking into the faces of my squad mates, each one etched with the same mix of fear and determination. As Jackson and I crawled through the narrow, constricted space, the silence was suffocating. The beam of our flashlights did little to penetrate the all-encompassing darkness. Our movements were slow, methodical, as we navigated the tight corners and low ceilings. The earth around us felt alive, as if it were watching, waiting. It was Jackson who first noticed the change in the air, a sudden drop in temperature, a feeling of being watched. We paused, listening intently. That's when we heard it, a faint whisper like a conversation just out of reach. We strained our ears, trying to make sense of the sounds, but It was as if the words were being spoken in a language we couldn't understand. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Jackson and I exchanged a look, a silent agreement that we needed to press on, but both of us were shaken. In the tunnels, we had grown used to the silence, the oppressive solitude. This was different, unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. As we continued, the whispers seemed to follow us, echoing off the tunnel walls. I could almost make out voices, but whenever I tried to focus, they slipped away, like shadows retreating from the light. It was as if the tunnel itself was speaking to us, the voices of those who had died here, trapped in the earth. Our mission led us to a larger chamber, the walls lined with crude shelves filled with supplies. It was here that we found the source of the whispers, a small radio, hidden among the supplies, still operational. Relief washed over us at the realization that it was just a piece of equipment, not the ghosts we had imagined. But the relief was short-lived. As we inspected the chamber, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. Turning around, I saw it, a figure standing in the shadows at the entrance of the chamber. It was fleeting, just a glimpse, but I was sure I had seen someone, or something, watching us. I raised my weapon, my finger hovering over the trigger, but the figure was gone. Jackson hadn't seen it, and I began to doubt myself. Was it just my imagination, fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the tunnels? Or had there been someone there, a specter lurking in the dark? We reported our findings and made our way back to the surface, but the experience in the tunnels stayed with me. The whispers, the figure in the shadows, they seemed to be a manifestation of the terror that had gripped us all. A terror not just of the enemy, but of the unknown, of the war itself. Back at camp, the others joked about ghosts and curses, but their laughter sounded hollow. We all felt it, the weight of the unseen, the presence of something otherworldly in the heart of the jungle. The war was changing us, not just physically but mentally. We were fighting against an enemy that was more than just flesh and blood. We were fighting against the shadows and specters of our own fears, in a place where the line between the living and the dead seemed to blur into oblivion. After our encounter in the tunnels, the boundary between the waking world and the realm of nightmares began to dissolve. We'd come to expect the unexpected in Vietnam, but nothing could have prepared us for the events that followed. We returned to base, visibly shaken, the images of the spectral figure and the disembodied whispers haunting our every step. Sleep, when it came, was fitful and plagued with dreams of shadowy figures lurking just beyond the reach of our flashlights. The haunting didn't end at the tunnel's entrance. Back at the camp, strange occurrences began to unfold. Personal items would go missing, only to be found in bizarre locations. More than once, I woke to the feeling of being watched, my eyes meeting only the darkness of the tent. But it was the whispers that were the most unnerving. They followed us from the tunnels, faint murmurs that would rise and fall with the jungly breeze. We would hear our names called from the shadows, turning only to find no one there. It was as if the tunnels had released something, a presence that had attached itself to us, refusing to let go. The squad's morale plummeted. Even the most seasoned among us started to show signs of strain. Laughter and casual conversation gave way to silence and introspective brooding. The jungle around us felt more oppressive than ever, its once vibrant life now a mask for the lurking horror beneath. Our days were filled with patrols and skirmishes, but it was the nights that we dreaded the most. The darkness brought no solace, only a deepening of our fears. The line between reality and imagination blurred, as we started seeing shadows moving at the edge of our vision, forms that would vanish when we tried to focus on them. During one particularly tense night, a scream pierced the stillness of the camp. We rushed to find Johnson, one of the newer recruits, thrashing in his sleep, his eyes wide with terror. He spoke of being trapped in the tunnels, of hands reaching out from the walls, grasping at him, trying to pull him into the darkness. We tried to dismiss it as a nightmare, the stress of war taking its toll on his psyche. But deep down, we all knew it was more than that. The tunnels had a way of seeping into your soul, of bringing your deepest fears to life. In the following days, our encounters with the Viet Cong intensified, but it was the unseen enemy that we feared the most. The haunting had escalated beyond mere whispers and shadows. We began to find symbols etched into the trees around our camp, unfamiliar and unsettling in their design. It felt like a warning, a message from the depths of the jungle. Our missions into the tunnels became a journey into the heart of our own terror. Each descent was a battle not just against the Viet Cong, but against the specters of our minds. The darkness below was no longer just a physical obstacle. It had become a manifestation of our deepest fears. The war was no longer just a fight for territory or ideology. It had become a struggle for our sanity, a fight against the ghosts that haunted us, both in the depths of the earth and in the recesses of our minds. We were soldiers battling an enemy we couldn't see, couldn't touch, but whose presence was felt in every whisper of the wind, in every shadow of the night. The haunting had become our reality, a constant reminder of the horrors that lay hidden beneath the surface of the Vietnam War. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks bled into months. The jungle's oppressive grip tightened around us, and the tunnels beneath became an inescapable nightmare. Our existence became a cycle of patrols, skirmishes, and haunting descents into the earth. But it was the unseen battles within our minds that were the hardest to fight. The constant tension, the eerie encounters both above and below ground, began to take a psychological toll on all of us. We moved through our duties like ghosts, our spirits as entangled in the shadows as our bodies were in the jungle's embrace. I remember one particular mission that marked a turning point for me. We were tasked with exploring a newly discovered section of the tunnel network, deeper and more complex than any we had encountered before. As we descended, I could feel the walls closing in around me, the darkness almost tangible in its intensity. The air was stale, filled with the scent of earth and something else, something foul. Our flashlights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and writhe on the walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our breathing and the occasional distant rumble of artillery. As we navigated the labyrinthine passages, I could feel my sense of reality slipping. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. They seemed to be coming from the very walls of the tunnel, a chorus of voices that were both alien and eerily familiar. We stumbled upon a chamber, and what I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my days. Scrawled on the walls were symbols and drawings that depicted scenes of unspeakable horror. Figures twisted in agony, faces contorted in fear, and amidst it all, a presence, a shadowy figure that seemed to dominate the tableau. I felt a hand on my shoulder and spun around, expecting to confront some unspeakable horror, but it was just Jackson, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. He had seen it too, the malevolent aura that hung over the chamber. We reported our findings and hastily retreated from the tunnels, but the damage had been done. The haunting images from the chamber stayed with us, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath our feet. The following days were a blur of paranoia and fear. We saw shadows in every corner, heard whispers in every gust of wind. The jungle, once a battlefield, had become a realm of terror, a place where the line between the living and the dead was blurred. Our missions became exercises in futility, our efforts to map and clear the tunnels thwarted by an enemy that was always one step ahead. We began to feel like puppets, dancing on the strings of some unseen puppeteer who reveled in our torment. It was during this time that I began to question everything: the purpose of the war, the meaning of our sacrifice, the very nature of reality itself. The tunnels had become more than just a strategic obstacle. They were a metaphor for the war itself, a descent into madness from which there seemed to be no escape. As the war dragged on, our spirits were eroded by the constant strain of combat and the haunting presence that followed us. We were soldiers fighting an enemy we couldn't see, battling demons that lurked in the shadows of our minds. The descent into madness was slow, insidious, and by the time we realized what was happening, it was already too late. The Vietnam War had become our own personal hell, a nightmare from which there was no waking. The war eventually ended, but for those of us who served in the tunnels of Vietnam, the battle never really left us. We returned home, but part of us remained in those dark, whispering passages beneath the jungle. I found myself in a world that had moved on without me, where the sounds of the city replaced the haunting whispers of the jungle. Yet, in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, I could still hear them, a faint echo of a distant past that refused to be forgotten. The adjustment to civilian life was a struggle. People didn't understand what we had been through. They saw the medals and the commendations, but they couldn't see the scars we carried inside. The nightmares continued, vivid and terrifying. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, feeling as if I was still trapped in those endless tunnels. My days were filled with a sense of restlessness, a longing for something I couldn't quite define. I tried to bury myself in work, in family, in the mundane routine of everyday life. But there was always a sense of disconnection, as if I was observing my life from a distance. I wasn't alone in my struggles. Many of my fellow soldiers faced the same demons. Some turned to alcohol, others to drugs, anything to silence the memories that haunted us. We were a brotherhood, bound by experiences that no one else could understand. We would meet up, share stories, and for a brief moment find solace in the knowledge that we weren't alone in our pain. As the years passed, the memories of the war began to fade, but they never completely disappeared. The sights, the sounds, the smells of the jungle were etched into our minds, as vivid as the day we first set foot in Vietnam. We watched as the world moved on, as Vietnam became a chapter in history books, a distant conflict that had little relevance to the present day. But for us, the veterans of the tunnel wars, it was a part of who we were, a defining moment that shaped our lives in ways we were still trying to understand. In time, I learned to live with my memories, to accept them as a part of my journey. I found peace in helping other veterans, in sharing my story and listening to theirs. It was a way to honor those who didn't make it back, to ensure that their sacrifices were not forgotten. The Vietnam War was a chapter in my life that had closed, but the lessons it taught me remained. It taught me about the resilience of the human spirit, about the strength that comes from facing your fears, and about the importance of brotherhood in the darkest of times. As I look back on those years, I am filled with a sense of mingled pride and sorrow. Pride for having served my country, for having stood alongside my brothers in the face of unimaginable horrors. Sorrow for the lives lost, for the innocence that was taken from us, for the part of our souls that remained in those dark tunnels beneath the jungles of Vietnam. The war may have ended, but its echoes still resonate in the hearts of those who were there. It is a reminder of the cost of conflict, of the sacrifices made by those who serve, and of the enduring spirit of the human soul. The Vietnam War was more than just a conflict. It was a testament to the courage and resilience of those who fought, not just against an enemy, but against the shadows of their own fears. In the end, it is a story of survival, of finding light in the darkness, and of coming home.